It's been a very boring offseason for Major League Baseball as a whole, especially Guardians fans. We may not like it, but they were right about one thing going into 2026, and I'll tell you what we have to accept today.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Guardians fans? Welcome on into another episode of Locked On Guardians. Appreciate you spending a half hour of your day with us to talk Guardians baseball, even in the middle of winter when there are coaching changes going on and all kinds of stuff going on other places. We are talking Guardians baseball when there's nothing going on, because we are the only daily podcast that covers your team every day, from the majors, the minors, the draft, everything in between. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. Thanks to you. I'm Justin Lada, one of your two co-hosts here for the last 3 years and counting, going on year 4 with my friend and coach Jeff Ellis, who's off today. And I've spent 18 years going into year 19 covering the Guardians minor league system as a prospect writer and editor. On today's show, we're going to talk a little Stock Watch Wednesday. We'll talk about we're buying where the next move comes from, holding on to hope about what the market might bring for the Guardians, and we're selling some prospect stock on a Stock Watch Wednesday. We'll talk about a new rule that could cost the Guardians some advantages, but there are ways to gain it back. We'll talk about that. And first, we're talking about a line we don't like the Guardians giving us. They are looking for internal development, but it is absolutely necessary no matter what we think. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The wildcard round is here, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Grab your profit boost pack for every NFL playoff game day. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Guardians your first listen today and every day, wherever it is that you get podcasts. We appreciate you being here with us every single day. Shout out to all the commenters, the everydayers, the insiders, members of the Everyday Club. You guys are the lifeblood of the community, the reason we keep showing up talking Guardians baseball. Without you, we're not here, and it's not as fun. So we appreciate all of you. Hoping to announce some more live stream fest this year soon. I'm going to start working on that, and hopefully we'll have some details about some I don't know, it won't be an in-person meetup, but we'll do a virtual video chat again sometime this month in lieu of No Guards Fest again, because of course, who wants who listen to their favorite podcast and have interactions with their favorite team? Nobody wants that, right? All right, let's get kicked off here. We don't want the Guardians to spoon feed us the internal development line. We don't like that, right? We hate that. I don't like it because a lot of people see that as it's inaction and they're not serious, but they need it, and they're not wrong. And I know it's not fun that they haven't signed any free agent hitters. They haven't made a trade. They haven't really added in a trade over the offseason, because they're not really a big free agent team, right? It's not a every year you go out and get the Edwin Encarnaciones and you don't get the, they traded Josh Naylor instead of adding that. And we talked about how they haven't really added a hitter since Brandon Moss in 2015 with a prospect for major leaguer trade. They've been on the other side of that very often in the offseason. It doesn't make it very fun. But internal development is something this team absolutely needs. And this segment is brought to you by not a sponsor, but a post I saw somewhere on social media talking about it. I was referencing the Guardians' 2018 playoff lineup against the Astros. And it was, Lindor, and it was Brantley, or it was Jose, and it was Edwin, and it was Donaldson, and it was Yandy, and it was Kipnis. And I saw the comment on it was, wow, this team really used to go for it. And I don't think that means what a lot of people think that means. And it's important to remember, too, the Guardians are very careful not to say how they're going to improve, so they didn't eat their words. The Guardians said they needed to improve offensively. They needed to improve in the outfield. They didn't say how they were going to get there. So as much as we said they know they need to improve, they didn't say how they're going to do it. So they very carefully, made sure they didn't box themselves into a corner, which they often do. And that may or may not be something you want to hear. But if you look back at those 2016 to 2018 runs they had, and even 2019, they won 93 games for the second time in franchise history in the wild card era, and didn't make the wild card. Same with 2005, although I don't think that 2019 team was going very far in the playoffs. The 05 team, I think, would have, but you could comment on what you think of the 05 team if you want, but that was one of the teams that could have been for me. Let me know what you think about that. But those 2016 and 2018 runs, internal development was the driver of that run. I mean, your ace was Corey Kluber. You traded for him when he was not even a real prospect. Like, a lot of people weren't sure that was who they were getting. And the best thing you could say about him is he averaged more than a strikeout per inning in the minors. He was older, and nobody really had him on their top prospects list. So it was for Jake Westbrook and Ryan Ludwig in that deal. So that was an internal development. Carlos Carrasco. Remember how patient this team had to be with Carlos Carrasco over the years? I mean, suspended for throwing at Billy Butler's head, or was it Melky Cabrera? One of those guys hit a home run. He threw the next guy in the head. And then he had Tommy John, and then he was struggling. He went to the bullpen, and then he finally figured it out. And then he grew into one of the best members of this team in the community. Beloved player here. Took a lot of patience, and that was also from an unpopular trade of Cliff Lee, who, by the way, came from an unpopular trade of Bartolo Colon. You had Francisco Lindor, drafted, developed. Jose Ramirez, signed as a very cheap international free agent. Very lucky to have him. Michael Brantley, traded for in an unpopular trade. CC Sabathia. It took patience for him to turn into the hitter that he was by 2018. Remember, by 2016 and 2017, he wasn't healthy. He didn't play at all in 2016 in the playoffs. And 2017, he was banged up. Lonnie Chisenhall, he was a guy you had to be patient with. Came up as a third baseman, but he was drafted. And you had to move him to right field, and you had to wait for him to become the strong platoon bat and the defensive right fielder that he turned into. And then obviously, injuries cut that short. Jason Kipnis, drafted here and then had some great years, and injuries kind of sapped that fun out of it. Yan Gomes, when the Guardians traded, God, I can't even think of the reliever's name now. God, that's gonna haunt me if I can't think of the reliever's name. I should know that. But they got Esmil Rogers, thankfully. They traded him to Toronto, and we thought, oh, Mike Aviles was a really good player at the time. That's the best player in the deal. No, Yan Gomes was the best player in that deal. And they had to wait and develop him. He got in the lineup. And then I know you're going to say, like, oh, well, they had Mike Napoli. Mike Napoli, as a free agent in 2016, was coming off a very Paul Sewald-esque year. Like, he was coming off a down year. Cleveland was a one-year rebound contract that worked out very well for them. It very well could have gone the way of a Domingo Santana or Eddie Rosario type move. It was a gamble, and it worked out. And then the next year, 2017, you were getting Mike Napoli back in 2017 if John Sherman didn't come along as a minority owner and help you get Edwin. And then you had Andrew Miller when things got real, right? They kept Jose on a second contract thanks to him. And now you have guys like Kwan, right, who are here. Now you need Manzardo. You need DeLauter. You need Bazzana. You need Bo Naylor to figure it out. You need to figure out who your shortstop is again. And remember, back then, they also filled their rosters with pieces that seemed odd. Remember Rajai Davis, right? He was a part-time player who ended up playing a pretty big role here, but, he wasn't great. He was, good enough. Marlon Byrd was actually doing pretty well before he got busted for steroids. I guess that's probably why he was doing well. Colin Cowgill was the opening day right fielder in 2016. They added Jay Bruce in 2017 because they paid more money than the Yankees. They paid on his salary. Josh Donaldson was a huge risk. He was hurt. So the Guardians do need internal development because even there's no Mike Napoli on this market. Like, Austin Hayes is not Mike Napoli. You're not going to go out and get Bo Bichette. You're not going to go out and get Kyle Tucker. You don't sign those kind of hitters in the free agent market like Eddie Murray's and, I'm trying to think of the guys, I guess Dave Winfield. Those guys aren't coming to Cleveland these days. They don't exist in the free agent market, and if they do, they're not coming to Cleveland. Internal development is important for them. It's about supplementing those players, which are most important. They don't pick that high in the draft, right? Which is why they gamble in the first round on the Brady Aikens, the Daniel Espinos, the Bo Naylors, the Chase DeLauter, the Jace Laviolettes. Those are guys that all had 1-1 talk outside of maybe Bo Naylor that fall. So they need to get better developing because that's how this team has always won. So you can go back and get excited about those teams. I was, but all those teams were developed internally. It wasn't like they were building through free agency. Rajai Davis and Mike Napoli did play key roles, but they weren't big signings. They were not. Mike Napoli was a rebound. Rajai Davis was a part-time player who just happened to hit one of the most memorable home runs in team history. If he doesn't hit that, I don't know how people really remember Rajai Davis in this town, to be honest, although he was a very exciting personality. So I know people want outside additions. They want help for the lineup, and I do too. This team needs help for the lineup. I'm not saying they shouldn't do anything, but the most important pieces, whether you like it or not, are going to come from internal development. The DeLauters, the Bazanas, the Manzardos, the Rokios, Bo Naylor, CJ Kafis. Those are the guys that are going to be the key, because that's always been how this team has won. Even going back to the 90s, Tomey, Bell, Ramirez, drafted, developed here. That is how this team always won. They supplement it, which every team should do. But they need the development to happen, and they're not wrong for saying that, as much as we don't like to hear it. All right, I'm going to talk about where they need to get better in order to have that development happen. And we're also going to talk about a rule change for the Guardians that might hurt them and how they can offset it. Let's get real for a moment here. Managing finances, I know that overwhelms me. You've got subscriptions, bills that keep going up. I don't have to tell you twice about that. And trying to figure out where all of our money is going each month. It's really easy to feel like we're losing control. And we don't have time to track down every transaction or look for hidden fees, right? And that is why apps like Rocket Money are important. And they come in because they're personal finance apps that help you take control. It finds and cancels unwanted subscriptions. It can monitor your spending, lower your bills so you can grow your savings. My wife and I are trying to do some home improvement projects this year. We want to go on vacation, and Rocket Money allows us to identify areas where we can cut back on our spending. Maybe we have too many streaming services and we're trying to move our money somewhere else. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join rocketmoney.com/locked on. That's rocketmoney.com/locked on. rocketmoney.com/locked on. As always, thank you for making Locked On Guardians your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Really appreciate everything that you guys have given to the community. And, we're just here talking. You guys are the community that make it fun to be here every day. And if you're here, you're living your team every single day, even when nothing's happening. Take it up a level. Go ad free. Join the Everydayer Club. Get Locked On Guardians with no interruptions. Members only Discord access and more for $5 a month or $50 a year. You can go to lockedonguardians.supercast.com or check the link in the show notes to learn more. All right, so very quickly, let's talk a little bit more about internal development and the areas Cleveland needs to get better at. And I think the first piece is that they need to get better internationally. If you look at the roster, high school picks have not worked for them, right? Like, look at the roster they have right now. You've drafted Brady Aikens, Daniel Espino so far, not working out. He could still change that. There's still time. Bo Naylor, we're still searching for the permanent answer there. Clint Frazier, I would say, ultimately didn't work in the Major League Baseball, but they did use his hype to land Andrew Miller, and that's not unimportant. That's part of drafting high school players, is using that leverage and using that upside and how long they carry value as part of trades. Tristan McKenzie, it worked for a brief minute, but it really didn't long term. Sam Henches was a high school guy too. High school picks have not been good for them. That's because the really good high school picks obviously are going very high, where the Guardians don't pick, which is why, you saw Frazier at 5 and Lindor up really high. You don't get those guys falling to you. Like, that's why you end up taking Aikens and Espinos and guys down that low, because they don't usually drop that low as high school players, not 1-1 talents. Those are the gambles they have to take. And I don't blame them for that, because those guys don't fall where they're picking normally, because guess what? The Guardians are actually pretty competitive most years, and they don't usually pick higher than the teens or the 20s, in the late 20s most years. Where they need to improve, I think, though, is the international market. I'm using the Brewers as a comparison here, because right now the Brewers have an incredible international prospect run going on. There's Jaison Chourio, right? They've got Jesus Mate. They've got a couple guys in the minors right now that are just really lighting it up. I think it's Luis Lara, who's one of their prospects. They are lighting it up when it comes to the international market in a way the Guardians just have not in recent memory. Jose Ramirez was a $50,000 signing. He was not a big time international prospect. And I would argue that a lot of his own development is self-driven. They've spent big money on guys like Dorsis Paulino, Junior San Quintin, Gabriel Rodriguez, not the one that's in the system now, but the third baseman they used to have that started off as a shortstop, which Junior St. Quentin also was a shortstop too, and then grew into be, 6 foot 230 and moved to first base. And some of you might be saying, I've never heard of those guys. Well, because they were high priced international free agents that flamed out before they even got past AA, and two of them actually never even got to AA. Then there's George Valera, there's Brian Rocchio, that big class. Those guys need to work out. When you spend internationally on the bigger names, they have to work out. Like Angel Martinez, somewhat big, is becoming a good role player, I think, even though I'm not as high on him, as other people are. I was big on Rafael Ramirez Jr., who was traded for Lane Thomas, who had a disaster over 2025, but was an interesting and big name I was excited about. And they often spread their international money around like the draft. They're not pooling all their money into a big name, which is fair. These are 16-year-old kids who barely speak English, and if they do, it's very rare, and there's a lot of projection, a lot. So it's hard to sit there and bank all your money on one guy. They sunk a lot of money into Gabriel Rodriguez, and I think he's still the highest paid international free agent this team has ever had. That wasn't Danny's Baez in the current era. And it didn't work out. It went very poorly. So I get it. But the kind of players the Guardians are going to get past their free agent years into their prime years are the Jaison Chourios. The other day, Jeff was talking about how those pre-arbitration contracts often don't work out, and they don't. He's right. But the way the Guardians play the game in terms of roster management and money, you have, high school players are the guys you're going to get to sign to those pre-arb deals. You're not going to get the college guys because of when they reach free agency, and because the college guys are going to get a different kind of bonus. Now, the high school guys are getting good bonuses too, but you also may not want to sign the college guys because you don't want to be signing guys into 33, 34 seasons. Very rarely does that work out. But when you can get a guy at 16 and he debuts at 22 or 21 instead of 24 or 25 as a college player, a high school guy you can sign to that pre-extension, pre-arb deal and get him into his age 28, 29, 30 season, buy out some free agency, like a Jaison Chourio. Those are the guys the Guardians have a chance at keeping, and they need more development there. They don't spend anything when it comes to pitching in the international market. Like the last couple of international pitchers I can think of for them are Fausto Carmona, Carlos Vargas, who burned out. Luis Oviedo was a big name, but wasn't big on money. And then right now it's Yorman Gomez, who also was not a big money signing. Right now, their big international names are guys like Robert Arias and Welben Francisca, have not really panned out. We'll see on Angel Hanao. I really like where that's going, but they have not really had a whole lot of, hits on the dart throws in international free agency. And those are the young guys they have to develop. You could supplement with college pitching in the draft and some high school guys with the way they've done it, and you could trust your pitching development, but you got to hit on those high school picks or those international picks. You have to find them, and you have to invest a little bit better. It has not worked out for them. And right now, Noel was a piece of it, but they haven't really had the Jaison Chourio type. And the Brewers right now, like I said, are cleaning up when it comes to international. That's a big place the Guardians are lacking. All right, this is going to span 2 segments. So I'm going to get into a thing we haven't really talked about on the show before. We kind of let it fall by the wayside, but it came out earlier this offseason from The Athletic. I think it was Saris. And it was that MLB was looking to regulate all technology. So you've got a lot of teams who are bringing in some of the best tech. And if you go on back and read the article, it talked about how some teams are buying tech and pieces of tech that they're not 100% sure how to even use, but they think it's going to give them an advantage. So they buy it, they install it, they grab the data, and they come back to it later and see how they can leverage it because they want that advantage. They want to be able to uncover things, and they want to be able to not miss anything, even if it costs them in the long run, because technology is cheaper than people, right? Unfortunately, in this day and age, we know that a little bit all too well, but technology is going to be better than signing a player. If the technology tells you more, you get more value out of it long-term because it doesn't age and it's more predictable, all that kind of stuff. So MLB wants to regulate all that because some teams are playing all the way at the top when it comes to technology and data, and some teams are barely investing at all. And MLB wants to kind of even the market for everybody. And it's not a bad idea in theory, but I don't like what they're trying to do with it because it eliminates absolves the blame of something else, and it could hurt the Guardians. I'll talk more about what that is, why I don't like it, why it could hurt the Guardians, and I'll give you a way that they can overcome what could be a disadvantage. The wild card round is here, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game to the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users can get a profit boost pack waiting for you inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts. You can apply to the bets that you like the most. You can go ahead and give you more juice in the bets you already like instead of forcing you to bet on something new. So every play feels a little bit bigger, and the boosts make you feel like your bets feel that way as well. Of course, the Browns are not in the playoffs. Shocking. They just fired a coach that's going to get hired very quickly somewhere else. They probably won't be able to get a good coach. The Guardians, they have the longest tenured manager coach in Cleveland now in Stephen Vogt, and they're plus 1,400 to win their division and make the playoffs, which actually is going down. So you might want to get on that now if you feel good about the Guardians' chances in 2026. Visit FanDuel.com, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game. Even though the Guardians are not doing a whole lot, you want to keep up with all of the latest news, analysis, and everything else to get you prepared for spring training and the regular season. Hit the bell on YouTube, and you'll get notified of the latest episode of Locked On Guardians. You'll get notifications for things like reaction videos for when maybe a move does happen or any other kind of news that's relevant we'll react to on YouTube. And if you auto download on all of your favorite audio platforms, wherever you get podcasts, we are literally free everywhere. You can't miss us. So you keep the show in your feed no matter what's going on, whether, like I said, you're going to the gym, taking your dog for a walk, maybe you're doing the dishes, doing some cleaning around the house. We can talk baseball with you every single day, no matter where you go. We'd love to be there with you. So getting back to where tech is getting regulated by Major League Baseball. So Cleveland, through some pointed questions, I want to say after 2024, we found out that the Guardians had that HitTrax tool, which basically simulates a pitcher's release point and stuff and movement and all that kind of stuff. It's basically a virtualized screen. It comes out of a pitching machine that comes out of a pitcher's arm slot that you can program in specifically for a pitcher you might be facing. That's become a big thing. And there's not as many, but teams are renting that. I don't know if they own it yet, but that was obviously a big deal in 2024. The Guardians and Yankees were using that. There's Hawkeye, which has replaced a lot of different areas of Pitch FX, things like that. They have that all those places. Hawkeye basically is all the cameras and the data that track spin rate and exit velocity, ball flight data. Most teams have that installed now. Cleveland was one of the first teams to have Edgertronics, which is those high speed cameras that break down pitch spin and all those sort of pieces of data that you can interpret into using for pitchers mostly, thanks to some of the guys they brought in. So Major League Baseball wants to sort of normalize data. They want everyone to have the same sort of technology. They want everyone to have the same sort of data. They don't want, and I don't disagree with this to a point. So you can take it and you could say, okay, the Los Angeles Dodgers have an infinite payroll to pay any players. They could bring in Kyle Tucker this offseason still somehow. So you cap and regulate baseball technology by saying, okay, the Dodgers might be able to run a $300 million payroll, but you're also going to have to use the same technology and data as the Pittsburgh Pirates, right? I think that's an understandable adventure, but that seems like putting a Band-Aid over a bullet hole because it's not a cap. You know what I mean? Like that's in lieu of a cap and finding like even space on TV deals, things like that. So the best teams don't have all the money, but that hurts the Guardians, honestly, because the Guardians are very forward when it comes to tech and data. I mean, they were one of the first teams with projection models. They had Diamond Vision or Diamond View, I think it was called, back in the 90s. They were one of the first teams to have that kind of data and do some of these forward-thinking things, thanks to guys like John Hart and Hank Peters. They didn't have that before, and Paul DePodesta before he went to Oakland and before he came to the Browns and everybody hated him. He was actually a big part of all that stuff. So regulating that could hurt the Guardians because they are pretty forward and they do have a lot of data and technology, and they are a team that's kind of model heavy when it comes to the draft and other places like that. So that could hurt them, but I think this will make a more important emphasis on in-person scouting. A lot of teams in recent years, I don't know the Guardians, but I think other teams, the Cubs, I know are one of them, where they are spending more money on technology and data and models and video than they are on people. A lot of people have cut in-person scouting and some of their scouts across the country because they're finding ways to cut back and using tech. If technology and data is regulated by Major League Baseball, I think the separator becomes your people. You got to hire good people. You got to hire scouts. I don't think Cleveland's cut as many as other teams have. Maybe they haven't cut him at all. Not that I've heard. But this is where having really good scouts and experience and eyes comes in. Everybody's going to be working with, if this does happen, everybody's going to be working with the same data, the same video, the same technology to evaluate things. So it's going to be dependent on the people to break down the data and teach it and make it something usable for players, or make it something usable that you can turn into acquiring a player that may need development. You could say, well, we can use this piece of data to say that this player's got this good basis of his game, and we can do this to improve a specific area of his game. So it's going to be important for everybody to dissect that and use that to their advantage, because as far as I know, there's no cap on how many scouts you can have and how much you can pay them. So that might be a differentiator that's going to come back that I think is gone in recent years, which I actually don't mind. I actually think that's a good thing. As much as I'm not sure that this is a good, the best fix you can have in baseball where you're regulating technology with spending and innovation. But I do like that. I think it brings back the advantage of scouts of knowing players, and it's going to depend on scouts and coaches to understand that data, interpret it, teach it, use it, and make it usable in a way for player acquisition and coaching. So that'll be very, very interesting. All right. The last thing we're going to talk about is buy, sell, and hold for Stock Watch Wednesday, of course. First thing I'm doing, I am buying. There's still a move to be made for this team. I know I said at the beginning of the podcast that internal development was going to be kind of the thing, and it still is. But it doesn't mean they can't supplement the roster. It doesn't mean they shouldn't supplement the roster. So you probably saw that the Cardinals ended up claiming and trading for Justin Brule, who the Guardians claimed a while ago and then DFA'd when they got Sharon Armstrong, and obviously couldn't hold on to him, which is very common this time of year. Teams claim guys and then they hope they can pass them through waivers to keep them in step. Didn't happen. So the Cardinals clearly are paying attention to what the Guardians are doing. They've got Zach Kent. They DFA'd him to add Brule. They added Brule. So I'm hoping that that means the Guardians and the Cardinals are talking. They're having dialogue, and that's the ends of the Guardians roster. They're interested in the 39th and 40th man on the roster. Hopefully that means they're talking. The Ketel Marte trade doesn't seem to be happening, which, by the way, if you weren't listening, Mike Hazen, I think it was the week before Christmas, did a radio hit on Sirius XM, and he talked about how the Ketel Marte talks aren't going to last all offseason. At some point, we're not going to be doing this into spring training. To me, that sounds like Mike Hazen trying to create leverage because he hasn't gotten the offers he wanted, and he's saying, well, we're going to cut it off eventually, so make your best offers. That seems like a guy who's trying to get leverage for his player if he's going to trade him. And I don't blame him, but that's how I'm interpreting that. But that means like a Brendan Donovan trade that hasn't happened yet. We heard a few weeks ago about how San Francisco and Seattle were circling and it never happened. Might be more pricey, but I'm hoping the connection is still there. So that's what I'm buying, is still a move to be made and a trade for the Guardians. And I'm holding out hope that there is an addition on a bat. This is still a very slow market. Kyle Tucker's still out there. Bo Bichette's still out there. Alex Bregman's still out there. Framber Valdez is still out there. Obviously, those guys aren't coming to Cleveland, but I'm holding out hope that the market is slow. Those guys have to find a home. Therefore, guys like Austin Hayes still have to find a home. And I'm willing to talk myself into Austin Hayes being something for the Guardians this offseason. So holding on to hope that the Guardians' patience pays off and they wind up with that. And I guess we'll end the podcast on not a sour note, but a downer. I was talking to someone the other day, and I think I'm selling prospect stock in Jaison Chourio. Talked about Jaison Chourio earlier in the show because the Brewers are doing good things. I would not be mad if the Guardians used Jaison Chourio in a trade this offseason to add a right now player, a bat, even a platoon bat, honestly. I don't care about international stats in the winter ball. Those don't matter because we've seen Gavrilarius and Giancarlo Noel rake for years in international ball. So that performance and data, like Ryan Rocchio was the MVP of his postseason out in Venezuela years ago. And we got Rocktober, but what is Rocktober in, Ray or Rune, or I'm going to stop trying to do that. Maybe Jaison Chourio deserves a mulligan for being hurt last year, but the approach to me is very concerning. It's a 35% swing rate. He's extremely passive. He strikes out more because of how much he takes. The walk rate is inflated because of his passivity. I don't like the data. There's not a lot of pop in the bat. I haven't seen great exit velocities. I haven't seen emerging stuff like that. Maybe I'll be wrong and I'll look stupid because he comes back this year healthy and looks better. But to me, he looks more like a guy who has to be a center fielder because he doesn't have the bat for a corner. And I don't know that he's a center fielder for sure. So he's a guy who's going to be moving down in my rankings because he's got to make up for it with defense and speed and getting on base. And I just don't know if the offensive side of things is going to translate. And I don't know how I feel about him defensively. I do know how I feel about him defensively. And I'm saying he's a fringe defensive center fielder right now. All right, so that was buy, sell, hold. Tell me what you're buying, you're selling, you're holding for the Guardians right now or Major League Baseball. And thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Locked On Guardians. Jeff will be back with you on Friday to talk Guardians ball with you. Make sure you subscribe and follow Locked On Guardians so you're getting all of the latest episodes. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is exactly what you need. It's built for you. Get Locked On Guardians ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. You can head it over at lockedonguardians.supercast.com to join the Everydayer Club. So that'll be until Friday, unless the Guardians make a big move or any kind of news in between now and then. So make sure you subscribe, follow Locked On Guardians to get the latest episodes. Really would appreciate a brand new Apple Podcast review. And as always, hit us with your comments. In the meantime, go Guardians, go. Stay patient. Remember, turtle development, whether you like it or not, that's the thing that's going to be happening. We hope.